After checking out the DLC trailers, there were a lot of really cool things shown, but I do want to know more about them, so we're going to be checking out Vaati's video here. I think this one is the one that breaks down the gameplay, and he has another one that breaks down the story trailer that we watched as well. But of course, before we begin, make sure to go watch the original. Link to that is in the description, as always.
So the gameplay trailer for the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC just dropped, and it's also extremely story-heavy.
Very.
Pure and radiant, he wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men.
Not ominous at all.
This is very much the story of Miquella. Let's learn what we can.
There is nothing more terrifying.
You'll recognize Miquella's cocoon here. It's located in Mogwin Palace, and that is the DLC access point that will give way to this.
I think I've seen a statistic on the fact that only like 30 to 40% of players have actually beat Moog, because apparently he's one of the more difficult boss fights, and it looks like the DLC is locked behind that, so I guess you just gotta get good.
What they're calling the Land of Shadow, a place that you can explore on June 21st as long as you've defeated Moog and Radahn. According to Miyazaki, the DLC is at least the same size as Limgrave in the base game, and this will be their largest DLC to date.
In that forsaken place, blood must spill.
Even bigger and
blood
better.
Here, fellows. The Erdtree faithful.
Interviews also reveal that there will be 8 new weapon categories and at least 10 new bosses.
They will never think.
Weapon categories. Actually, how many weapon categories are there in the game as a whole? Let me search this up real quick. Okay, so from the quick glance there, around 40 different types of weapons? That's pretty insane, considering how many weapons there are in each category as well, and the likelihood of them each having their own kind of unique animation along with them and special moves. Yeah, man. Wow. Usually you only see like 5 or 6 weapon types in video games like this. I guess there really is something for everyone. And this probably doesn't include any of the like magic that you can master, or the different types of schools of magic.
Enemies here are the vestiges of a war that occurred in the Land of Shadow long ago. They've just been obscured by the Erdtree until now. So many feature designs that would be considered cursed or blasphemous in the lands between. And there's no better example of that than the newest member of Marika's family, Mesmer.
Mother,
Mesmer.
wouldst thou
So that is his name. I thought it might have been like the name of Zaragon or something, but no.
so bereft of light?
We're entering the DLC as a Tarnished that was sanctioned to become Elden Lord, but it seems events in the base game might pale in comparison to what's playing out here with Miquella, who arrived long before we did.
I presume you, too, are keen to know just what kind Miquella is doing here.
So let's talk about everything. I have analyzed every frame, translated every interview, and kind of haven't slept in 2 days, so good night, and I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, go and show your support to Vaati, man. He does amazing work on this.
Death. The new race of restless flame.
Come now, touch the withered arm and travel to the realm of shadow. I will not be far behind.
Actually, the fact that he uses Blood Flame, does that mean that he's an omen?
Before we break down the story, I'm going to highlight what I think are 3 of the biggest gameplay details that I found hidden in some translated interviews. First, Elden Ring's DLC will actually feature a new power scaling feature that will come into play while you're in the Land of Shadow. Here, our character will be able to upgrade their attack power in a way that is separate from your rune level. Let me explain that. So, Miyazaki mentions that this system is somewhat similar to how attack power works in Sekiro. In Sekiro, you don't level attributes to do more damage like you would do in Elden Ring. Instead, your attack power can be raised by defeating certain bosses and claiming their memories. So, a system like this is being added to Elden Ring, and it will be a new way to get stronger in the DLC. In addition to using runes to level up as you're used to. The reason this is being added is because From Software know that there are a lot of players who will be going into the DLC at high levels with their completed characters. And so instead of having players with completed characters just steamrolling the content, they want players to have that classic experience of struggling against bosses and needing to explore other areas to get stronger and to try again. So
I think that's a good idea.
A new attack power resource, and hopefully also by scaling our characters appropriately, I think this idea could be genius. And it's especially important for a game like Elden Ring. It gives you that experience over again. Because this game will live or die by the enormous, expansive world it has, and you need to want or need to explore that world.
Because it's not really the steamrolling of bosses that make people want to play Dark Souls. It's the journey to conquering them. So I do think, yeah, it's a great idea to give those players kind of like a fresh start without actually having to do a completely fresh start.
Next, of course the DLC will be getting many new weapons, but most interesting is that these new weapons span 8 new weapon categories. Elden Ring already had a ton of weapon types, so getting 8 more is actually kind of insane. So far, we know 6 of these new categories. One is the dueling shield, which combines offense and defense. Another are these reverse grip swords that we see being wielded in this clip. And then there's weapons that enable a martial arts style, reminiscent of the Dragon Bone Fist from Dark Souls 2, or the Senpo monks from Sekiro. Miyazaki also mentions a large Japanese sword and a new large sword, whatever that means. But
I had assumed
personally, I'm most excited for these.
That it was just
these
a normal
are
thing.
Equipable throwing weapons where all of your melee attacks are thrown attacks. Elden Ring always had really smooth ranged gameplay, but the weapons were so bad that it just wasn't worth playing. So I really hope these are viable. Anyway, the third gameplay point I want to mention is that, again, Miyazaki says that the DLC area should be at least the same size as Limgrave. But you need to bear in mind, this is coming from the same humble man who told everyone that Elden Ring would take about 30 hours to complete. So I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, that was a lie. I don't know, maybe if you like try to speedrun the game. What I heard, it's certainly not 30 hours.
If Miyazaki is underselling the size of the DLC here, if anything.
It's much better to undersell your product rather than to talk it big and to set expectations way too high. That way everybody's just going to be disappointed. But I mean, I also understand why you'd want to like talk it up and try to sell it too. I don't think Miyazaki's in the position where he's kind of clamoring for investors though, so he can do stuff like this.
That's enough about gameplay for now. Let's talk lore. Shortly after the DLC trailer released, I received an email from Namco Bandai about it, and they included this short poem. It reads, "The Land of Shadow, a place obscured by the Erdtree, where the goddess Marika first set foot, a land purged in an unsung battle, set ablaze by Mesmer's flame. It was to this land that Miquella departed, divesting himself of his flesh, his strength, his lineage, of all things golden. And now Miquella awaits the return of his promised lord." Let's break that down, starting with the Land of Shadow. According to interviews with Miyazaki, the Land of Shadow is a place that has become physically disconnected from the Lands Between. So this isn't an alternate version of the Lands Between, nor does it seem like we'll be going backwards or forwards in time to access the DLC for once. And that is refreshing compared to past From Software DLCs. I am excited for a DLC that will expand on the present world
the tiny
for once,
arms,
rather than a past or future world. That said, if anything, the Land of Shadow will definitely contain many remnants of the past, as it is a place obscured by the Erdtree, where the goddess Marika first set foot. If this place can be obscured simply because the Erdtree exists, then I lean towards thinking that this might have always been some sort of shadowy dimension, rather than once physically being a part of the lands between landmass, although there is a...
I can kind of see it as like an upside down version of the Erdtree, or maybe like a dimension on top of our dimension. Although considering that there are other boss fights that we do in basically dream worlds, it could also be something like that, but it is connected to the Erdtrees in some way. And it's where America first set foot, so...
nicely sized gap right in the middle of the lands between where this might fit.
Yeah.
But I think the Erdtree does generate a ton of light, so the idea of a land of shadow being obscured by the Erdtree kind of makes a lot of sense. As for why this place became obscured by the Erdtree, I think we can lay the blame squarely at the feet of Marika, since the age of the Erdtree is her age, after all, and this age only came about when she ascended to godhood
because
and
of her, yeah.
became the vessel of the Elden Ring. The biggest part that's always been missing from Marika's story is what happened before she became a god, and the shadow of the Erdtree seems to hide the answers to that exact question.
Oh, does that mean the woman pictured here is Marika? Or potentially someone related, in a way? Don't know.
Since the poem calls the Land of Shadow the place where the goddess Marika first set foot. Marika setting foot in this place before setting foot in the lands between makes a lot of sense, because we've always known that Marika isn't from the lands between. She's a part of the Newman race, and the Newman
so is this where the Newman come from?
Have come from outside the lands between.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I remember this now. I forgot it while I was watching the trailer, but they do specifically mention that, and it is a land separate from the lands between, so yeah. That might be the case.
The character creator calls the Newman supposed descendants of denizens of another world, so either this other world is the Land of Shadow, and Marika originates from there, or Marika comes from somewhere outside the lands between and outside the Land of Shadow, but simply set foot in the Land of Shadow before venturing to the lands between. Either interpretation could be true at this point, I think. At any rate, it seems like the Land of Shadows is extremely important to Marika's past. Miyazaki drops a huge detail on that note, stating that the Land of Shadows is the place where Marika became a god, and the Golden Tree was born.
Huh.
I can't wait for the DLC to elaborate on those circumstances. When Marika did claim the Elden Ring, her most significant act was removing the Rune of Death from it. Afterwards, many previous cultures of death were rendered obsolete, as souls were now supposed to return to the Erdtree. So, if souls started to return to the Erdtree, where they were presumably reborn, where were...
But then the souls probably were going to this Land of Shadows before they started going to the Erdtree, right? Which is potentially tying into the line of why the Erdtree obscures this land. In a way, it kind of makes it obsolete because we stole all the souls that you were supposed to receive.
Souls going before that. Now, this is just speculation, but is it possible souls once went to the Land of Shadow? Could the Land of Shadow once have been a sort of afterlife? As evidence for this claim, consider that A. Mikola only managed to depart to the Land of Shadow when he divested himself of his grace and his flesh, so his death led to him being here. Next, trailer dialogue explains that those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet.
And the grace of gold being the Elden Ring, or maybe just the Golden Order and that whole system in general, so... yeah, the only way you can get here is if you relinquish all of that and actually die.
Death in the embrace of Messmer's flame. So those who are stripped of the grace of gold have to meet death in this place. And the last bit of evidence for this speculation is that there already is a shadowy realm of death alluded to in Elden Ring lore.
In one of the weapon
Hell
descriptions?
So, since we know that the Erdtree disrupted the previous cycles of death in the lands between, it definitely makes sense to me that the Erdtree might obscure the Land of Shadow.
Or actually, thinking about those, like, I forget their exact name. It's the giant bird things with, like, super awesome looking wings that kind of pierce through dimensions, and then they have, like, a bunch of spirits or whatever holding swords in their wings. They're shooting laser beams at you. Is that, like, a doorway to this place? The Land of Shadows?
Beyond just being a bright source of light, it might have replaced its existence as a sort of afterlife. But I could definitely be wrong on the afterlife stuff, so let me know what you think. At any rate, the Land of Shadow has now become relevant again, for the Tarnished have found a way to enter this forsaken place. The poem
we're the
goes on to
protagonist.
read, a land purged in an unsung battle, set ablaze by Messmer's flame. I interpret this as the land was purged in an unsung battle, and then it was set ablaze by Messmer's flame. These seem to be two separate things. So first, let's talk about the war, the unsung battle. In an interview, Miyazaki references the war when he was asked about this Wicker Man enemy, and replies, "So this giant basket of flame was a terrible, gruesome weapon used in a war that occurred in the Land of Shadow."
Yeah, during the story trailer, we actually see that shot of these giant things walking through a city and completely burning it down. Messmer standing above everything, looking down.
The kindling that you see is actually the remains of bodies that were put in there to burn. As for whose enemies were put inside the Wicker Man, I'd wager that it was Marika's enemies, since she's the one who came out victorious as a god.
I would assume so,
with the golden
yeah.
tree as well. Just speculation though. Zully the Witch points out that the Wicker Man traces its origins back to Celtic myth, where people were allegedly sacrificed within.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, during the trailer reaction.
Zully the Witch.
Decided to catch up on Berserk. I can't wait to see how much of the recent chapters for Berserk being like 3 years old will show up in Elden Ring. Yeah, it's that guy. I forgot like which chapter it was, but I do remember seeing something like that.
Which points out that the Wicker Man traces its origins back to Celtic myth, where people were allegedly sacrificed within a Wicker statue, and many other users have pointed out that this design may have instead been drawn from Berserk.
They were never saints. They just happened to be on the losing side of a war.
If you look closely, you can actually see a mane
is that a fire
red
giant?
hair attached around a face on the Wicker Man's upper thighs.
Or it's just red hair.
Like this is referenced in the giant's red braid, which reads, "Every giant is red of hair," and Radagon was said to have despised his own red locks. Perhaps that was a curse of their kind. Incidentally, the red hair here is just one of many symbols in the trailer that are considered blasphemous over in the lands between. Omen horns, for example, are another such symbol of despised beings under the Golden Order, and omen horns are seen here on the Wicker Man, here upon the Lion Dancer, here on these enemies, and even upon the roaring rune bear thing, which also has that red hair.
I keep forgetting. You gotta look for the horns, man. America despises all these horny bastards, so yeah, obviously they'd all be here.
And then there's this hippo thing that's using an aspect of the crucible, which were also aspects that became despised and scorned. And
so it became like a tree, like yeah, of course, that makes so much sense. The crucible, nature, life.
Then there's a spirit wielding the iron cleaver that's the signature weapon of the Misbegotten, who
oh my god, of course! There's so many things I missed, fuck. I did say at the very beginning of the reaction that, yeah, I'm not gonna do this as well as everybody else. But at least I can remember it.
Also despised. So, lots of blasphemous symbols going on, but no character in the DLC has
Vaati's just
as
built
many
different,
of them
man.
as Messmer. who is the character that is at the heart of the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, maybe even more so than Miquella. This is the demigod who would set ablaze the land of Shadow.
Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction?
I don't even know what he's trying to say here.
So
What does that even
bereft of
mean?
light?
So this is Messmer, and the mother he mentions is Queen Marika. An
Okay.
official interview makes this quite clear. To quote Miyazaki, "And you may have seen at the end of the trailer, there was this piece of key art where it shows Messmer sat in this throne-like chair. And people who've played the game may recognize this throne to be one of those from the boss room where you battle Morgoth. And this
I didn't
represents
know.
the thrones at the base of the Erdtree. And it's supposed to symbolize that Messmer stands on equal footing to these other demigods and children of Marika who sat around in these thrones and held the rooms of the Erdtree.
Gotcha.
So he is an important figure who rivals these other demigods. And as you play the DLC, you will learn a little about why he wasn't featured in the Legends of the Erdtree, The Lands Between. You'll realize why he exists in this shadow, this
Did he
land
commit
of
some
shadow.
sort of sin?
As to who
Some blasphemy?
Messmer's father is, well, there are many signs that they're a product of Radagon. For one,
Yeah,
there's
the
the
red
red
hair.
hair.
Yeah.
And then there's the fact that Messmer's name starts with M, which suits the naming convention for the children of Marika Radagon, who are Miquella, Melania, and possibly Melina. Speaking of Melina,
I
we've
see.
talked many times about the butterfly theory, which posits that all children of Radagon Marika have a butterfly of their own.
And because she
Miquella's
has
is the
one,
nascent
she might be
butterfly,
one of them too.
Melania's is the Aeonian butterfly. And since Melina is the kindling maiden, we've long speculated that hers was the smoldering butterfly.
But that
now it
might be
seems
Messmer's
that butterfly
now.
could belong to Messmer.
Because
instead,
it's smoldering and
given
flames, and
his much
Messmer's
more
flames.
overt
Yes!
flame symbolism.
Okay.
That said, there is a fourth pink butterfly featured in the trailer now, so
Oh, yeah, true.
it's possible the butterfly theory might still have wings. If Messmer was legitimately born alongside the other children of Marika Radagon, that actually places his existence a little bit later in the timeline, still in the age of the Erdtree, but after Radagon left Rennala for Marika. Whatever the case, Messmer would find himself in the Land of Shadow, delivering death to those stripped of the grace of gold.
Those stripped of the grace of gold shadow meet death in the embrace of Messmer's flame.
Thank
Since
you,
this line
Mesmer.
is delivered by a third party, it seems there's a common belief here that Mesmer's role is to deliver death to those stripped of grace who find themselves in the Land of Shadow, including, apparently, our Tarnished, who finds themselves at odds with Messmer.
Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction?
So in a way, is he somewhat similar to like Hades or something?
In this
Just a
dialogue,
keeper of this
I think Messmer
afterlife?
is questioning why Marika has seen fit to restore grace to the Tarnished and sanction their lordship, guiding them to become Elden Lord, even though in his eyes we are bereft of light.
Oh,
Messmer
that's what he means.
strikes me as a
Okay.
bit of a rebel and an outcast. He's not what you'd expect from someone who is clearly killing people who have been stripped of the grace of gold. But I do ultimately think that he holds Marika in high regard. I do think he's doing this on her behalf. The fact that he sits on a demigod's throne might be evidence enough, but in an excellent bit of photo manipulation by user Woosa69 on Reddit, we can clearly spy a statue of what seems to be Marika in the background. It has
she
her signature
hugging
braid
someone?
and her armband as well. And uniquely, she's holding a baby who could be Messmer, but that's just speculation. We know Marika uses people, even her enemies,
Yeah.
even the blasphemous. She will keep a fire giant alive just so it can watch over something for eternity. She will disguise herself as Radigan, make her biggest rival fall in love with him, and then abandon that rival
Oh my
and
God.
undo them from within. She will condemn the misbegotten and then get one of them to craft weapons for a tarnished so that they can become Elden Lord. So in a similar way, I feel like Messmer being useful to Marika, despite very clearly being a blasphemous character, really isn't that strange. But what do I mean about Messmer being blasphemous?
Yeah,
Well,
what
first,
exactly
there's
is
the
it?
snakes.
The serpent?
According to the Gravekeeper cloak, the snake is viewed as a traitor to the Erdtree.
Oh.
And now we don't know if they're talking
see.
about Messmer's snake or the Great Serpent, which is what we assumed before.
Yeah.
Whatever the case, there's no way that Messmer's snakes would be looked upon favorably by the Golden Order. In the Erdtree Colosseums, for example, the audience delighted in seeing the bronze snakes on the armor of the gladiators be beaten and battered. And then there's Messmer's usage of flame. According to the Spark aromatic, fire was prohibited to those who served the Erdtree. And while this
Blasphemous.
rule was forgotten as the war drew ever on, I do think Messmer might have some links to the flame of the Fell God, if I had to guess. He's got the red hair, and snakes do appear
So it's
on
not
the Giant's Flame
A
Forge in the
blood flame,
mountaintops.
it's just a regular
I'll admit
flame
these
of the Fell
connections are pretty
God.
shaky.
Gotcha.
We don't know exactly what kind of flame Messmer is using
Oh, well, yeah.
just yet.
There it is. Okay.
Lastly, Messmer clearly has a connection to Dragon Communion, which is also something that's frowned upon. Dragon Communion is the abhorrent act of consuming the hearts of dragons
can we
to
tell?
commune with the ancient dragons. And
Oh, it's because of his
become
wing
more
thing
like them.
in the back?
According to the Magma Worm's Scale Sword, Dragon Communion is a grave transgression for which many partakers were cursed to crawl on their bellies as shadows of their former selves. As evidence for Messmer's communion, his one good eye is yellow
the
and
eyes.
slitted, which is a clear symptom of consuming the dragon hearts that
Oh, I forgot about that. Oh my god. Wow, all these small little details, man. They could tell you so much. If you know a lot about the lore and obviously remember how to pinpoint it.
even our Tarnished gets afflicted with. And, not to mention, his winged armor looks a lot like the Drake Knight set, which is a
I
set
could agree.
that labels the Drake Knights as partakers of communion. Then there's this symbol on the box art, and even the fire he conjures that looks a little bit like the Dragon Communion seal, but it's not a one-to-one match. And then serpents themselves are considered imperfect dragons, in Dark Souls lore at least, and Messmer's serpents are sprouting draconic wings, so there could be something there. On this promotional page, we also learn that Messmer's full title is Messmer the Impaler. And it could be that this name simply comes from his fighting style, but I will also point out, as many others have already, that there is a catacomb in the Lands Between called
the Impaler's
Catacombs. So
is there anything
it's possible
here?
he got this reputation from certain deeds that he committed in the Lands Between. Of all the characters I can think of, only the Fire Giants and Marika come to mind as ever being impaled. The Fire Giants' stakes aren't identical to Messmer's spear, but they are similar.
Similar,
And
yeah.
Marika being impaled at the end of the game never really had a good explanation, so maybe this is a chance for them to explain that, finally. So, in conclusion, I get the vibe that Messmer is this rebellious, kind of blasphemous child, but that they're still loyal and, more importantly, still useful to their mother, who is Marika. Though, of course, all my opinions and speculations in this video, especially, are very subject to change.
Yeah.
Next, let's talk about Miquella.
Alright, Miquella, what's your
is
plan?
many things. He is the demigod son of Queen Marika and her consort Radagon. He is Miquella the Nascent, cursed with eternal youth. He is Miquella the Unalloyed, who sought to find a cure for his sister's scarlet rot. He is Saint Trina, an alter ego who deals in sleep and dreams. And he is Miquella of the Erdtree, a sort of Erdtree that he eventually embedded himself within. He's also the subject of an hour-long lore video on my channel.
Yeah, we watched that.
I'm also going to be talking about him again later this week in a lore video about Mohg, so please forgive me for being brief in my description of him here. Suffice to say though, Miquella is a very important demigod. He's also an Empyrean, which means he is a rare character eligible to become a god and
subject to the
Queen
whims
Marika.
of the outer gods too.
Additionally, his sister says that he is the most fearsome Empyrean of all, and that he possesses the wisdom, the allure of a god. It's this allure that has led to his fate in the base game, which is to say, he appears to be dead at the hands of Mohg, who is Miquella's demigod half-brother. Mohg ripped Miquella's cocoon out of the Erdtree and abducted him. Now Miquella's cocooned flesh lies in Mohgwyn Palace, and his withered arm there will become the entrance to the DLC. Miyazaki elaborates on this point, stating that Miquella has traveled to the land of shadow for his own reasons,
last part of
and
the
it's
trailer.
up to the player to follow in his footsteps, as many other NPCs also have before you. The poem reads, "It was to this land that Miquella departed, divesting himself of his flesh, his strength, his lineage, of all things golden." The fact that Miquella has divested himself of his flesh reminds me a lot of Rani, who slays her own flesh intentionally in order to free her from the control of the two fingers. Through his own death, it seems, he has departed to the land of shadow, though now he is without his strength. He's also likely divested himself from his great rune, which is probably this one, seen here, which takes the same shape as this emote you get for pre-ordering, which is called Ring of Miquella. So all of this should explain why he needs you. The poem continues, and now Miquella awaits the return of his promised lord. If I had to guess where we're ultimately headed, it would be the castle here, right beneath the shadow of the Erdtree. Here, an ark is catching the bounty of the Erdtree, just like the rune arcs do, and the sky above is enwreathed by these ethereal cloth tapestries. According to Miyazaki, these tapestries are a veil, and they are a symbol of the land of shadows being hidden from the world outside. And speaking of veils, the Black Knives are assassins that are invisible due to their concealing veils, and we have a talisman that is a part of those veils.
Oh, does that mean the same fabric that makes their cloaks or whatever, their veils, is the same thing that's being used here?
Put together from dark cloth with a lustrous sheen that completely hides the wearer's presence. Earlier, we talked about how Marika was likely responsible for the land of shadow being concealed or veiled, and according to the Black Knife armor, the Black Knives are rumored to be Numen who had close ties with Marika herself, so maybe we're already starting to understand the nature of this veil. That said, the way this veil is laid brings to mind a lot of things. At first it reminded me of Marika's bedchambers. Then I thought maybe it could represent Mohg's bloody bedchamber, as he puts it. Or it could even represent the baldachins of the deathbed companions, which, according to the baldachin's blessings, are hidden temples in the guise of a bedchamber. This could represent Miquella's long-awaited rebirth, or maybe his eternal nascence.
Dream.
It could even represent the fact that he is Saint Trina, an alter ego that has to do with sleep and dreams. So many things. Speaking of Saint Trina, though, there's a brief shot of a masked character who looks like they're sleeping in a purple swamp. The droopy flowers in the background
Yeah, we
might
talked
be
about that.
St. Trina's lilies, and the purple haze of this swampy area definitely gives off sleep effect vibes. You might recall when Rani first meets with you in Elden Ring, she does so amidst a mist, which has put Kale and his donkey to sleep nearby. And the more I think about it, the more I think this encounter might have to do with Mikola. In this moment, Rani gives you the spirit calling bell and 3 wolves, which she says are from Torrent's former master. And considering we see what looks to be Mikola riding Torrent here in the Land of Shadow, I think we can reason that Torrent
That it's from
is
Mikola.
Mikola's steed, and
Yeah.
thus that Mikola has given you gifts via Rani and favored you ever since the very beginning of the game.
I'm assuming that this is the steed that you get, where you can magically summon them and then use them to traverse the world. Did not know that there was lore behind him, but I guess everything has lore behind it.
But the rabbit hole goes deeper, because Melina is the one who gives you Torrent's whistle at the start of the game. And
So
since
Mikola has
we've
been
now
helping us
learned
from the
that
beginning?
Torrent was likely in the Land of Shadow with Mikola, does that mean that Melina would have ventured to the Land of Shadow to retrieve Torrent from Mikola at some point? Remember, Melina's origins are largely unresolved in Elden Ring, so I really hope we learn more
mysterious
about
maiden.
her story in this place. The fact that she might have traveled to a land that's enwreathed in Mesmer's flame might also explain why she's burned and bodiless, but now I'm just engaging
Maybe?
in unhinged speculation, and these theories
Yeah.
might have got out of hand.
Well, we'll
But
have
let
to
me
wait
do
a little bit on
unhinged
that one, I
speculation
think.
on one more thing.
Gotta wait for it to cook.
and I want to draw your
Literally.
attention to the fact that we've learned that it's necessary to kill Radahn to access the DLC. That's curious. It seems to hint that
Oh yeah, it's not just Moog, but Radahn as well. Radahn specifically. The stars need to move in order to access this DLC. What would that suggest?
his death is essential for events in the Land of Shadow to make sense. Logically, this would be related to the meteor shower that happens after you kill him, right? Because
Yeah.
it's in this moment that the fate in the night sky is suddenly let free. Perhaps Melania was even chasing this world state where fate is freed from the night sky, and maybe she was sent here to kill Radahn on behalf of Mikola.
Oh yeah, that's right. Of course. We still don't really know exactly why Melania was fighting Radahn, right? Because we had theories before that it could potentially be because, somebody told her that Mikola was here, and so she came over here. And curiously, I think Moog's palace is somewhere underneath here, or well, close to here, so the direction is correct, and maybe that's the reason why. But if that's the reason that Radahn needs to be gone in order for Mikola to achieve his goal, in order to access this Land of the Shadows, and yeah, it makes a lot more sense.
Fought him all those years ago. What's crazy is we still don't know why Melania fought Radahn, so hopefully we get an answer for that as well. And of course, most of you won't have to worry about killing Radahn, as your characters are likely already at the end of the story.
I haven't even started.
Speaking of the end of the story, Miyazaki's recent interview reveals that they don't
Someday.
currently have plans to make
Someday.
a second DLC for Elden Ring, so whatever ending that's coming with Mikola might be
Is
the final
yeah,
one.
the conclusive
That
one.
doesn't necessarily mean that it's shaping up to be a good ending with Mikola.
Yeah. It's just an ending.
Pure and radiant, he wields love to shrive clean
Oh,
the hearts of
man.
men.
I mean, I can't learn about all this
There is
lore and
nothing
not play the game,
terrifying.
right?
To
We gotta try it
shrive
someday.
is to hear confession, to assign penance and absolve someone. Sounds like a pretty harrowing process, and that is a perfect match for Mikola, who is described as both benevolent and fearsome. This is that ominous love of Mikola, which is a really unique vibe. and I'm very excited to see where things will go. Believe it or not, I've still got a lot of the trailer to break down, but first I'd like to finally reveal this. This is the Shadow of the Great Tree, a unique displate design that I wanted to create where you can flip it upside down
Also,
and
is that Twilight
get
Princess?
a completely different perspective. There's two prints in
I
one
think it
here.
is.
So
Based.
this way, it's the giant tree with roots snaking through the city below in the second half. But put the other way, it's a city with the trees of the underworld
looks awesome.
holding up the world.
You can flip it both
This
ways.
is all made possible thanks to Displate's innovative magnet system, where prints can be easily stuck onto walls in whatever orientation you'd like without damaging your walls at all. If you get in quick, you can get this print for 22% off with the link below, and if you add any other prints to that order, you'll get 33% off everything, no matter what else you add to your cart. I have a whole set of other prints that you can browse on my page, or you can even get official Elden Ring prints on Displate. So I'll leave a link to all of that in the description as well. Thank you for supporting my videos with any purchases you make. Let me quickfire some observations at you before I go, since there's a lot I couldn't quite fit into the previous parts of the video. First, this is my favorite enemy design in the trailer. Its body is actually made up of 3 or 4 robed humanoid beings, and they're all coordinating together to puppeteer this beast.
Oh, so that's why I was like, it reminds me of like a Chinese dragon, because it basically works and functions in the same way. Its movements and all of that. They probably did look at like how a dragon like that would move, and they animated this monster in that particular way.
Just like the traditional lion dances from Chinese culture. It's
Lion
amazingly
dancers,
inspired.
okay, yeah.
According to
That's what they're
Miyazaki,
called.
there was a culture that existed before the Golden Tree, and the lion dancer is derived from that culture. Next up, this character who sits alone in a room filled with debris. Quailag over on YouTube has acutely noted that they look very much like the scholar who appears upon the carrion inverted statue, which is a key item given to you by Rani during her questline. The
And it's
area they
inverted.
appear in seems to also feature the many bird cages of Raya Lucaria, so it's exciting to see that we might be learning more about some of the glintstone sorcerers. Next, this character wears the deep navy hood of expatriated royalty, and the hood was gifted to those who saw the guidance of grace, who then departed on missions to faraway lands, from which they would never return.
So she
They
somehow
cast
found
a
herself
completely
here.
new spell type, and in the background we see lion statues with omen horns. And the fact that these lions with omen horns are venerated might suggest that this was from a time when horns were seen as signifiers of the divine and not
Blessings
symbols
rather than
of ill
curses.
omen. Also,
Yeah.
I was so excited to see this player cast these golden wings. We have many aspects of the Crucible spells, but we could never cast the wings, which until this
Oh, I
point
didn't know that.
were only able to be utilized
I only saw,
by
yeah.
the Crucible Knights.
I always saw the
And I
Crucible
don't
Knights
think
do
that's
that.
the only new Crucible spell we're getting access to. A new screenshot
I can
shows
become
the
a tree.
Tarnished using these
Oh.
golden porcupine spines, the same ones utilized by this deformed hippo enemy after it charges, and the sound it makes is just like a Crucible spell. But I wonder if this pot thrown by the player character is a spell or a consumable or a weapon art. And speaking of new screenshots, I want to know the story behind this guy. I will protect him with my life. It seems like he appears in this
got little
same
tiny
field
arms.
of blue flowers, which, if
Love
you look
it.
carefully, has that grave that has a hole in it that you find in Morn's castle. There's also, of course, this red dancer character. There are a
Yeah, who
couple
is
of
she?
dancer characters in Elden Ring, so maybe she's related to that. Oh, and I also adore the design on this guy who is attempting this impossible task of wrenching a sort of spinal golden ribcage through a hole in his skull. Interested to see what happens after that. And if you look closely
Probably
at
nothing
his
good.
robes, you'll notice he's actually the same character as the man in this portrait.
Oh! no. Oh my god, of course. Yes. Dang, dude. What happened to... Who are you?
At another point in the trailer. So there's clearly a story here, especially if they're worthy of a portrait, right?
Yeah.
Next to this man is a woman who looks a little bit like a deathbed companion. The origins of the deathbed companions were alluded to in the base game, so it seems kind of fitting that we might explore those origins further in the Land of Shadow, but who knows. I also wonder if this enemy could be a Knight of Radahn. They use gravitational magic, as a lot of his knights do. They're also armored somewhat similarly, and they ride a boar, and Radahn's helmet has boar-like tusks, so that might be a thing. But there's just too much to speculate over. Could this armor be related to the Knight's cavalry? This Twitter user points out that Messmer's statue looks a lot like the pose of the Cleanrot Knight. Is there a reason for that? Could these black knights with gold trim be related to Malekith? Are the people who are wearing masks part of House Mirai? Why is the top of this castle blackened and disintegrating into the sky? Why is there a line of birds standing before you in this swamp? Is this character afflicted by frenzy? Are they a worm face? Their posture is kind of similar. Are we getting Runebear communion spells? And a huge question, why does Messmer only have one functioning eye? So many questions, but I guess it'll have to wait. Subscribe for more Elden Ring lore in the coming weeks, and subscribe to keep up with all the biggest news regarding the DLC. Thank you to MissPap1 for helping me with the edit for this video, and thank you to all of those I referenced in this video and in the description. Check out the new Displate if you're interested, and thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.
No, thank you, Vaati. Man, there's so many things I ended up missing. Like practically, well, really every single scene in that trailer had something that you can link to a particular character or weapon, or even like a concept in the base game. There were some pretty solid connections made here, but obviously we can't know if it's true or not until the DLC drops. Man, but this video makes me so excited to see how it all connects to each other, especially if some of these theories do come true. Like, what would that mean? How would that change our perception of our journey as the Tarnished? And finally, maybe we can discover what Miquella's actually after, why he's kind of in this presence that is just so different from everybody else. But yeah, I'm gonna be jumping over to Vaati's other video on the story trailer. So thank you guys so much for watching this one. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one.